Betty Lynn was a TV actress best known for playing Thelma Lou on The Andy Griffith Show. Thelma Lou was the love interest of Don Knotts' character, Barney Fife. But when Don was signed on to work in films for Universal Pictures, there was no more need for Betty on the show. Not only was she out of a job, but she could no longer be around her secret crush. That was none other than Andy Griffith himself, and the world didn't learn the truth until the posthumous release of the actress's memoir. Join Facts First as we explore how Betty Lynn took her Andy Griffith secret to the grave. When Betty Lynn died in October of 2021, she was finishing up her memoir. The memoir's posthumous release brought with it a shocking revelation. Apparently, Betty Lynn harbored a pretty major crush on Andy Griffith. Fans of The Andy Griffith Show will best recall Betty for her time playing Thelma Lou. She was the love interest of Barney Fife, played by Don Knotts. The on-screen relationship led many to wonder if Betty and Don ever hooked up. Don certainly tried to get his hands on Betty, though Betty was secretly pining for Andy. She took this secret love for Andy to her grave, and the revelation sheds new light on an episode of the show called Cyrano Andy. In it, Andy's character posed as a romantic rival to Barney to fix a rift that had developed between him and Thelma Lou. Andy's plot paid off, with him professing his love for Thelma Lou in a dramatic way, and her realizing the man she truly wanted was Barney. Though this was simply great comedy for audiences, looking at the scene knowing Betty was secretly in love with Andy makes it all the more poignant. Of course, there were reasons Betty Lynn didn't want her love for Andy Griffith to be known. Andy was married to his first wife, Barbara, from 1949 to 1972, meaning he was happily married throughout the duration of the period in which he was working with Betty. Betty claimed the closest she ever came to revealing her love was when she made a joke suggesting that she wished cloning was a real thing so there could be one Andy for Barbara and another Andy for herself. Betty claimed she had a good deal of respect for Barbara and had no intention of ever overstepping her boundaries. But that didn't stop her from fantasizing. Betty had a hard time keeping her love for Andy inside. Though Betty Lynn kept her love for co-star Andy Griffith inside, there were times when it leaked out. One such time was when a publicity photo was taken showing Betty's hand resting on the actor's knee. Spectators at the time had little reason to be suspicious, but like the aforementioned Cyrano Andy, it appears much different in retrospect now that we know the truth about the actress's love. The Andy Griffith Show came on the air in 1960, and Don Knotts left the series in 1965 after receiving an offer from Universal Pictures to work in the movies. Few who worked for the Andy Griffith Show held a grudge when the actor took the opportunity. Betty Lynn was certainly one of many of Don's co-stars on the series, glad to see him succeed, though his departure meant she no longer would be needed. Because of this, Don's success proved bittersweet for Betty, and this was exacerbated by the fact that she would no longer have a reason to be around Andy. Betty was heartbroken during the filming of her final episode. She could be seen crying, though no one knew that part of the reason was that she was secretly in love with Andy. Betty and Andy went their separate ways, with the Andy Griffith Show continuing for a few more years. They worked again together a few decades later, though their interaction wasn't so pleasant this time around. Before we tell you more, be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to Facts First if you haven't already. Betty Lynn cherished a parting gift from Andy. Before Betty's time on the show was up, Andy Griffith drew a portrait of the actress and signed it for her. Andy signed the portrait with an inscription saying that although she'd been Don Knotts' on-screen love interest, she should have been his. Though this sentiment was likely hyperbolic, it meant a lot to the actress. Betty held on to the portrait until her dying day, though no one knew the true reason why the painting and inscription meant so much. The revelation of just how in love Betty secretly was with Andy is made all the more shocking when you realize there was a period of around 2 decades when they weren't on speaking terms. Betty once refused to talk to Andy for 2 decades. Betty Lynn didn't quite find the career longevity after the Andy Griffith Show as Andy did. When Andy came back on the air with the successful series Matlock, he threw Betty a bone by casting her as the secretary of his character. However, Betty wasn't too grateful given that the character she was tasked with playing barely had any lines. When Betty politely asked Andy if there was a chance of the writers giving her character more, the actor allegedly ignored her. Then, as time went on, Betty began to receive even fewer lines. Eventually, she realized she had made a mistake by bringing the issue of her character having no lines to Andy. But by that point, it was too late. She was ushered off of Matlock, and this incident caused the actress to not talk to Andy until 2008. Apparently, the thing that made Betty forgive Andy after 2 decades was the actor calling her up for some career advice. He'd been offered the opportunity to play one of the leads in the 2008 romantic comedy Playing the Game, which was one he went on to take. Before deciding to take on the role, though, Andy wasn't sure. He decided to call up his old friend Betty Lynn. Playing the Game was a romantic comedy that showcased Andy as a man still getting down with the ladies, and the actor was possibly unsure about himself and his sexualities entering into his final years. Betty Lynn was so touched that Andy thought of her and wanted her advice that she decided to forgive him for the way things went down on Matlock. She also seems to have boosted the actor's confidence a good deal during the call. Betty and Andy mended their friendship just in time. The triumph of Andy Griffith coming back onto the screen with Playing the Game was dampened by the actor's subsequent death in 2012. Betty Lynn never got to tell the actor how she felt about him during his life, but at least she got the chance to mend their friendship. Andy divorced from his first wife Barbara in 1972, which meant Betty could have technically come back into his life and let her love be known. But by that point, she felt too much time had passed. Andy remarried twice, with his second marriage lasting from 1973 to 81, and his third marriage lasting from 83 until his death. He was 86 years old when he passed away in 2012, and Betty Lynn was 95 when she passed away in 2021. Betty Lynn didn't marry while she was alive. While Andy was married 3 times, Betty Lynn didn't get married once. She was engaged to the same man on several different occasions, but ended up calling things off for good once she realized she was never going to be the main object of his desires. Besides being known for her work on The Andy Griffith Show, Betty remains notable for her prominent work in USO shows during World War II. Now it's time to hear from you. Did you know that Betty Lynn harbored a secret crush on Andy Griffith? Let us know in the comments section below. And before you go, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to Factsverse if you haven't already. Click the bell icon to stay updated on all our latest content. By the way, if you haven't joined Factsverse as a member yet, be sure to look below this video and click the join button. By becoming a paid member of Factsverse, you'll get access to exclusive video content that you won't find anywhere else. This includes some of our more mature content that isn't suitable for public audiences, which includes topics like Hollywood actresses who posed for Playboy and some of the steamiest moments in movie history. Plus, you can enjoy these videos completely ad-free. Our biggest fans will notice they also get badges next to their name when they leave comments on our videos. We pay special attention to comments from our members, and so do other viewers. So if you want exclusive content from Factsverse or inside access to discussions with other community members, click the join button to get started for just $4.99. There are hours of members-only videos waiting for you, with new videos added every month. And we're actively working on bringing even more features to help fans like you connect with other members and get more of your favorite content. Just click join, and we'll see you inside the membership tab.